So, I'm really happy about Mark that we get to hear about your research, and thank you very much for inviting us to OIST University, Okinawa in Japan.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Thanks for being here.
So, of course, we are interested in your research, what it is that you would like to share with us and the world.
The first thing I should say, OIST is a kind of innovative place where it aspires to be on the cutting edge of science generally. But this unit that we're in here right now is called EXU, the Embodied Cognitive Science Unit. And this is itself a kind of innovative space or place where we're really trying to be on the edge of cognitive science and do stuff in a way that hasn't really been done before. So embodiment is the idea that organizes this unit. The idea with embodiment is that cognition is not just in your head, but it's something you do in relationship with the environment, with other people, with technology. And we try and understand all of those interactions when we think about cognition. The difference here is that when we start to appreciate that cognition is something in the environment, when we think about, for instance, the nature of something like behavior change or disorder, we're not thinking solely about the person. We're thinking about the context in which they're in, the people that are around them. All of those other factors become much more important. Yeah, so maybe I'll tell you a bit about my own work. It looks at interactions between scales, effectively. So let's take it simply. So you have a biological, psychological, and a social. And the interactions between those scales we've known about for a long time, right? We talk about the biopsychosocial model in psychology. What we don't understand very well is the interaction between them and how that actually happens. So my own PhD work looked at people interacting recurrently over time in particular contexts. So me and you, if we come back here tomorrow and do the same thing, and then the day after and the day after, we start to lay down patterns in the relationship between us, but those patterns are also connected to the space. So think about this. If I meet you and I know you from a work context, but I meet you in the supermarket, there might be a little moment of awkwardness because the patterns that normally shape our interaction together now are kind of out of alignment. So the idea here is that this kind of interaction process where we interact together in spaces over time is really a kind of generator of patterns, both of the individual and of the group.
What does it tell us for our relationships, for our business meetings?
I think it tells us a lot of things. One very important thing is that it helps us recognize that we are part of these larger systems. So we hear this kind of conversation a lot nowadays, where people, let's say, talk about something like the patriarchy. And historically, maybe there hasn't been such a strong scientific understanding of exactly what that is. We kind of recognize it. We see there's systems of power in play. We see there's dominance for some people over others and so on. But when we recognize this distributed pattern shaping both our individual minds and the groups that we're part of, we can start to see maybe how something like this gets reproduced within ourselves, within our organizations, within our communities, within our culture. So attuning to these types of things and starting to understand this and appreciating what we mean when we speak about embodied cognition really gives you a sense of the kind of layers of connection and the complexity that exists and that shapes your individual mind.
Which means we could then change the patterns, right?
Yes. So I think we need a better understanding of the patterns to be able to change them. I don't think it makes it immediately obvious that they're easy to change once we understand them, but understanding them is going to be necessary to change them. So to kind of maybe carry this forth a little bit, prophylaxis is something that ants do. In effect, they regurgitate stuff from their stomach, or they produce chemicals, and as they interact, they share these chemicals. And as part of that process, each ant learns about its place within the colony. It learns about the boundaries of the colony. It learns about the jobs it has to do. Now, it doesn't know that it's participating on behalf of a colony, but somehow in this interaction, it's picking up all the information it needs to be able to act in service of the colony. And now we're obviously not ants, but there's something similar in what we do. So the information we share feels like it's just emerging from me or from you. But actually, when we lay down these patterns that I was talking about previously, in some sense they open up a channel for us to share information that also lets the larger systems that we're part of reproduce themselves. So if we know that, we can start to understand that interaction is this key site of production and reproduction. And if we can change people, or if we want to change people, one good place to think about making that change is in the interaction process itself. So in a sense, I had the same question you had. If we understand these patterns, does that mean we can change them? So something we're working on now. So this I'm working on with Monica Jamaludin, who you know, Mushfika, and a couple other collaborators, Aisha Baladi and Dave Snowden and his team at Kinevin. And the idea here we talk about in terms of way shaping. And the idea is, if we understand this reality that we're kind of a nested system, like a Russian doll, can we then use that to change both at the individual level and then scale that up to the collective too? And it's true that we can. I think, the understanding that I just talked about, also we can refine that a little bit and start to develop principles, theory and tools that allow us to then actually make more effective changes, both for ourselves and together.
So what does it mean in regards to leadership? Because you mentioned patriarchic leadership, and we are talking nowadays about shared leadership and diversity.
I think the reality it paints is a good one to come to grips with. Embodied cognitive science tells us that we're deeply, deeply interconnected with other people in the world around us. And I think appreciating that is a good starting point for leaders nowadays. Gone are the days of, the kind of individual hero, and maybe good riddance to some of that. I think it also helps us better think about our own biases, regardless of our position. But in leadership, I think understanding and appreciating that we have biases is going to be vital, right? If some of my action is, in some sense, let's say, take the example of reproducing the patriarchy, I want to be able to be sensitive to that in a way that allows me to somewhat decouple from that and redirect my action somewhere else. So the way shaping approach is about understanding how, given the environment I'm in, that environment is shaping my behavior. And is it shaping it in ways where I am, say, acknowledging and aligning with the systems that I do want to reproduce, like the larger systems, whether that's a fairer system, a more just system, a more equitable system, whatever the case is. Acknowledging and aligning those, and, say, recognizing and resisting those that I don't want to. So once you have this understanding, you can ask, well, although I have this feeling and I feel like I should do this thing, where is this coming from? Is it coming from this set of norms that I don't want to reproduce, or is it something that I do want to see more of?
Wouldn't that mean that for companies, diversity is a must, and managers, leaders should be in a global international team in order to get influenced by others?
I think the science speaks to very clearly to the fact that diversity brings about or supports or enables resilience. So there's something called the law of requisite variability. And the idea there is that a system needs a certain amount of complexity if it's able to, say, engage with the requisite or equal complexity in the world. So having diverse viewpoints, having diverse experiences, gives that system, let's say the organization, more complexity with which it's better able to adapt to whatever conditions it might encounter. And this is true at an individual level too, right? The more skills I can develop, the more I build resilience into my own capacities, the more I'm able to, say, manage complex situations and both express my agency and the things that I want to do, whilst also being better equipped to respond to the things that the world gives me, right? I think resilience, in a sense, is not enough on its own. Mm-hmm. Resilience is, as we talk about it nowadays, often this kind of flexibility, ability to respond, ability to change and respond to changing conditions. That's obviously very important and getting more important as the world gets more and more complex. But the other piece that we want to bring with our work is also this understanding of agency, right? I don't just want to be flexible and responsive. I want to also be agentive and pursuing the things that I know to be good. So the way-shaping approach, in some sense, is about balancing those two. How do I make it so that the world kind of moves through me more fluidly, mm-hmm. but I also want to make it so that I can move through the world in a way that responds to my needs. And by my needs there, I'm talking about the negotiated needs that I have in relationship to the collective. So we're really moving away from this kind of individual-centric idea of I just want to do this thing because it's good for me. We're thinking about how do you both understand this layered system and then work with this layered system to move it in new directions when the needs be.
What about artificial intelligence? What role does it play in your work, in your research here at OIST?
Yeah, artificial intelligence is on everybody's mind at OIST, and I think all of the projects that are, or let's say a lot of the projects that are emerging are thinking about how to integrate it. So in our own work, like with the biologists and the physicists, and a lot of what they're doing is using artificial intelligence to explore huge data sets and extract, interesting stuff from those. For us, I see the future of artificial intelligence as part of the way-shaping project, maybe in some sort of very tailored and specific feedback mechanism. So in the sciences, there's two general approaches, let's say. One is called a nomothetic approach, and it tries to abstract general principles that hold across populations, let's say. And another is an ideographic approach. And an ideographic approach looks at the individual person and tries to understand them over a longer period of time and understand them in rich detail. Now, we know at this point that an ideographic approach is much more effective for individual behavior change. Because the averages that we get from a population might not apply to the individual. So AI opens up the opportunity to not only collect the rich data, but process it and feed it back in a way that's very tailored to the individual person, or the individual group, or the individual organization, or maybe even society, who knows. And I think that kind of feedback process is often what we lack. When we try and set up our environments presently, we don't have the kind of flexible means by which we can give ourselves the just-in-time feedback that we need, just at the time that we need it, right? So I think that kind of flexibility is going to be incredible.
Okay. So actually we've just been to Brussels, where we've talked to Dr. Ira Hebold-Haraldsen and Professor Ole Petter Ottersen, and both of them said that our data is not accurate right now because we have the population from Asian countries, from African countries, from different countries are still missing. So the data from that. Yeah. What about that?
Yeah, I think so I have a colleague and friend, Abiba Bahrain, who I did my PhD with, and she's one of the leaders in this field at the moment. And she's very, this is not my field at all, right? But from what I gather from her, she's acknowledging huge bias in some of these data sets, and that's a real problem. So something like facial recognition software that's trained on particular types of biases is going to reproduce those biases and lead to all sorts of injustices. So personally, maybe it would be interesting to see some of that slow down to the point that actually we're not, implementing these tools in ways that they have these kinds of threatening or damaging effects. But it's going to roll on in some fashion, right? Somebody somewhere is going to be doing it. I think more and more regulation, clever, smart, intelligent, informed regulation, I think that's going to be the way forward.
Your final words to our audience?
So maybe my final thing would be to ask your students or whoever's watching to kind of reframe how they think about themselves a little bit. So when we think about something like habits, what we think about is habits are things that in some sense position you within your environment relative to flows of energy, information, material, resources that can serve your needs, right? So if you think about this room, for instance, it's organized in a way that keeps the sun, relatively at bay, the wind at bay, gives me a certain amount of light. I position my books in a way where I can reach them if needs be. Everything is organized in such a way that it's optimized so that the flow towards me in this room serves my job, right, let's say. What happens is that a lot of the time we end up misaligned where the flow of some particular thing is either excessive or deficient, right? So think about us on our phones these days, right? The flow of information is too much and we're getting some sort of digital overdose. If you think about habits in this way, I think it's, first of all, an interesting reframe, but it also speaks to the idea that what we're looking for a lot of the time is a kind of balance, right? How can I position myself in my environment such that I'm open to the things I need to be open to and relatively closed from the things that I need to be closed? And the way shaping approach is about that. It's about helping you think about that, about designing your environment to support that. It's about understanding that as we move through our environments, whether it's over the course of a day, a week, a month, a year, and as we move through the spaces in which we act, we're always continually kind of refreshing this possibility of moving slightly differently, right? If I position things in this room tomorrow, I might come back and act differently because of that repositioning. And that's, I think, something to keep in mind and start to play with and start to see that you are really immersed in these really fascinating flows all of the time. And what you're trying to do is regulate your relationship to them. And I think we can learn to do that a lot better.
Thank you so much,
Thank you
for your time.